This is Of Men and Dragons, Book 1, Chapter 24 by DrBlackJack21. Jack was the last to wake up, as was now tradition. Emerald had gotten up early to cook, which was quickly becoming her chosen role, and Jack could definitely smell the bacon in the air. He was starting to wonder just how long his bacon stores would last at the current rate of consumption. Emerald was explaining her latest lesson to Shahar as she wrapped some sort of bread and egg mixture in bacon, secured it with a toothpick, and fried the bacon roll-ups in a skillet.
"I'm telling you, they tamed lightning. This whole ship is powered by lightning. They are running off of stored-up lightning at the moment. Usually they make new lightning by creating a small star inside the ship. With their ship damaged, they can't do that right now. Instead, they're going to borrow some of the powers of our sun."
Shahar's look was split between impatience and confusion as she tried to simultaneously will the food to cook more quickly and listen to what Emerald had to say.
"But what happens if they take our sun's power? Won't it get colder?"
Angela was starting to trust Emerald more and more in the kitchen, but still kept half an eye on the girl's work as the AI responded. "It won't affect the heat of your planet any more than the plants around you do. They've been doing the same thing as long as they've existed, taking the sun's power and turning it into energy they use to grow and flourish. By the time the power of your sun reaches us here on your planet, it's already done its thing, and your sun doesn't need it anymore." Emerald finished the first batch and set a plate of them in front of Shahar and Jack. Shahar grabbed a piece a little too eagerly and started to toss it into her mouth before Emerald snatched it out of the air while admonishing Shahar.
You don't just eat the whole thing. You have to slide it off the toothpick like...
No, I'm going to redo that.
You have to slide it off the toothpick like so.
In the overly delicate way only Emerald seemed capable of, holding on to one end of the toothpick, she placed the morsel in her mouth and drew the toothpick out before chewing. Emerald's eyes were half closed in rapture, and Shahar quickly followed suit. Soon all speech had ended, filling the ship with a comfortable silence as the two predators lost themselves in the flavor of their food. Jack wasn't going to miss out and took some for himself. The bacon was the primary flavor of the food. Unsurprisingly, it went well with the egg. The bread was more for texture and made the meal a little bit more filling. But there was also a hint of garlic and something else with a little zest Jack couldn't place. The confusion was evident on his face because Angela supplied an explanation.
"The mystery flavor is celery salt."
Jack wasn't sure what that even was, but then again, Angela usually took care of stocking the ship with supplies, so he wasn't surprised to have a spice he'd never heard of on board. Angela was pleased with the effect the meal was having on everyone's spirits, but decided it was time to get down to business. "Since you got the tunnels dug out, the next step is to run the power cables out to the side of the mountain. With a little luck, we'll have the solar panels up and working in a day or two." The group had demolished the first 3 batches, but as Emerald pulled off the 4th batch, Jack swiped them all before either predator could get a bite and put them in a container to take out to the workers. "We can run the cables this evening, but first, I want to go check up on the workers. They probably have enough shaped wood to begin the first lodge." Shahar gave Jack a glare that quite handily explained how dangerous it was to come between a hungry predator and her food.
"And you are taking my bacon away because..."
Jack held up a hand and started counting his fingers. "First, too much of one thing isn't healthy. You need more variety in your diet. Second, you've already had enough breakfast. If you overeat, you'll be sick all morning, and we won't get anything done. Third, those workers came all the way out here and risked a lot to help us out. This will be a good thank you. Fourth, can you think of anything else that would inspire loyalty in the workers faster than bacon? Fifth, okay, I didn't think it through enough to have a fifth and assumed I'd just come up with one before I got there. But the previous 4 should be enough reasons." Shahar glared at Jack for a few more moments before slowly allowing her gaze to wander.
"Fine, I guess you get to live. For now."
Jack bowed his head in exaggerated gratitude. "Your benevolence is an inspiration to us all." Jack brought out the bacon roll-ups as the workers finished their own breakfast. When he lifted the cover and the scents wafted out, All heads turned towards him. Setting the basket on a bench, Jack backed away. He knew better than to get between a bunch of Argun in their first experience with bacon. Shahar managed to restrain herself from joining in as she translated for Jack. Compliments of Emerald. She thought you all had been working hard and deserved a treat. Jack watched as the feeding frenzy began. There was a moment when Jack feared trouble was brewing as one of the younger woodworkers started to push another out of the way. However, Fayen proved more than up to wrangling her charges with a cuff to the back of the offending Argun's head. The proper pecking order established, the rest of the after-breakfast snack went off without a hitch. The basket was quickly emptied. Everyone was made sure of this when Longthol held the basket upside down over his head and shook it, just to be sure there was no hidden compartment with more bacon hidden inside. Fayen shook her head in amusement at the youngster's antics as she approached Jack. When she spoke up, her gravelly voice oozed satisfaction.
You keep enough food like that coming, and I might consider the rest of your debt paid. These lads don't need any help shaping more wood. Why don't you show me what you are thinking about next? I have a feeling it's not going to be what I would normally expect.
Jack nodded his head and led her and Shahar over to the area he and Shahar had cleared earlier. Okay, so this is the spot I'm planning on putting up the first lodge. The first step is to put up a wooden frame like this. Jack withdrew a schematic he and Angela had drawn up from his pocket, showing the skeletal outline of the building he had planned. It didn't take as long as he feared to explain the idea of size and scale. Fayen caught on quickly.
So, once you get the beams in place, are you going to line the walls in skins? I see several issues if that's the case. Not the least of which is there is no way you'd retain enough heat in an area that size. I'm hoping you're not planning on making it all out of wood. It would take forever to shape enough lumber to fill in the gaps.
Jack shook his head. I have something else in mind. Quicker than lumber, better insulating, and easier to repair. If you can get this section up here, Jack pointed at the schematic and again at the spot on the ground he indicated. Shahar and I will get the next parts ready. Fayen looked at Jack with a combination of curiosity and skepticism.
You know, my father had a saying about people promising things too good to be real. But I'll give you a chance to prove you know what you're talking about. After all, you have to pay us whether or not you waste your time.
Shahar's face expressed her confidence in Jack's ability to follow through with his promises as they parted ways. They brought along Embrel and Lonthal to help with this portion of the plan. Jack explained, and Shahar translated for Lonthal. He held up a branch about 3 inches thick and 7 feet long, as well as a thinner sapling only about an inch wide. So what we need are a combination of long, thin branches like this and even thinner saplings like this. Jack waved towards the forest near the lake as he continued. Shahar and Lonthal can gather those. Meanwhile, Embrel and I will get the clay, mud, and reeds we need by the lake. Just get as much as you can and load the cart up before lunch. After we eat, I'll show everyone what we'll be doing with everything. As they worked, everyone stayed more or less within sight and sound of each other, and the required materials accumulated quickly. Embrel laughed as she worked, brightening the morning work. She had mud up to her elbows, streaked across her forehead and all over her clothes.
You know, I've never done work like this before. My father always said things like this were for other people to do, but this is so much more fun than learning to read and write.
Wiping her hand across her forehead in the same movement that had first put a streak of mud on her face, Embrel continued,
I'm curious what you had planned for the dirt, clay, and reeds. It's exciting to see strange human technology at work.
Jack grinned as he heaved another shovelful of dirt into the bucket Embrel would take to the cart once it was filled. This is an ancient technique used by humans for thousands of years. There are better building materials, and we might switch to those eventually. But this method was used for so long precisely because of how quick and easy it is to assemble, while also providing significant protection from the elements. I wouldn't be surprised if this technique quickly spread to the surrounding villages as well. Throughout human history, it was often the least flashy technologies that had the most significant impact on the quality of life. Is he doing bricks? Emerald tilted her head to the side with a mischievous grin on her face.
Said the man who traveled here on a ship that sails between the stars of the heavens.
Jack shrugged as he worked. As impressive as that sentence may sound, indoor plumbing had a more substantial impact on people's lifespans than faster-than-light travel ever could have. Now Emerald looked confused.
You mean like your sinks and toilets on the ships? It's nice I don't have to go fetch water from a well, but I don't see how that could make a person live longer.
Jack grinned as he readied another lecture for the poor girl because of such a simple question. To understand that, you first have to understand microorganisms such as bacteria. To introduce you to the subject, let me tell you the story of Jon Snow and the Broad Street Pump. Emerald had an odd combination of interest and dread on her face while listening as they continued working. Shahar watched Jack and Emerald laugh as they worked and wondered what crazy ideas he was explaining to her this time. As much as Shahar enjoyed the benefits of human technology, she was more interested in it working and less interested in how it worked. Still, it was good to see how far the young Argoon had come in such a short time. As it was, she was probably now the third most educated person on the planet, and if Jack wasn't careful, she might become the second. Somehow, Shahar didn't think that would bother Jack in the slightest, though he might take that as a challenge. Lonthal was also watching the two laugh, but his expression was one of confusion. At Shahar's raised eye ridges, he finally voiced his thoughts.
How is it that you and Emerald came to understand Jack's language in such a short time? You haven't even known him for a season, and Emerald has known him for an even shorter period. Yet the two of you seem to understand and translate for him with ease.
Shahar's hands continued to work as her thoughts turned to the memories of both her and Emerald going through the procedure of learning the language. After seeing it performed on Emerald, she had no more understanding of what had happened than she had when it had been done to herself.
Jack would hate for me to use the term human magic, but that's the best way to describe it. He simply gave us the language.
Lonthal looked stunned at the idea, his hand frozen mid-chop.
He simply gave you the language? Just like that? Can he give you any knowledge he wants?
Shahar shook her head, not noticing Lonthal's inaction.
No, apparently this only works because our minds already have the framework for the language. It didn't teach us something new so much as attach certain sounds to already existing knowledge. I'm probably the worst one to explain the idea, since I don't really understand it myself, but he can't add new information. He can only expand on existing information. There are still many words he uses that I need him to explain before I understand, and several I still don't understand after the explanation.
Lonthal was having a hard time reconciling the many feats Jack had performed in such a short time with the small, unassuming man the hunter was familiar with. Then something else occurred to him.
Why didn't Jack just come in and take over everything? The more I learn about him, the more powerful he seems to become.
Shahar smiled as she worked.
Jack is an odd man. He doesn't think twice about wielding power the likes of which you and I could never dream of, but he's not interested in using it for anything other than protecting his family. Although mostly, Jack simply wants to be left alone.
Lonthal looked confused again.
If Jack wants to be left alone, why is he putting this outpost together? Even for him, it seems like a lot of work. So why do something so ambitious if he's not interested in being some kind of lord?
Shahar considered how best to answer without giving away information that wasn't hers to reveal.
Everything Jack does is for his family.
Lonthal worked silently for a moment, contemplating the explanation. Eventually, the question he'd had on his mind since his revelation the other day worked its way to the surface. Looking back at Jack and Emerald, he gave voice to his thoughts.
So how did Emerald become a member of Jack's family? I understand how you bonded your way into Jack's house, but Jack's relationship with Emerald is more like father and daughter, despite there being no shared blood between the two of them.
Lonthal noticed a slight chill in the air before turning and seeing a dark expression on Shahar's face.
Just how exactly do you think I bonded my way into his house?
Lonthal realized he'd absentmindedly said the wrong thing again, and looking back at Shahar's string of issues in the village, it was easy to see where. Holding up his hands in surrender, he quickly backpedaled.
I didn't mean to imply that you slept with him just to get into his house. I just meant it's evident that there's a connection between the two of you. You two are already more close than most partnered couples in the village.
Shahar's expression quickly morphed from anger to confusion as she contemplated his words. True, Jack was one of her closest friends these days, along with Angela and Emerald, but Lonthal was all but outright calling them a couple. Looking at Jack, her feelings only seemed to grow more complicated on the subject. She was more protective of Jack than the other two. But that was just because he was so small and weak, right? Then there was the night at the inn. Holding Jack tightly against the wall had certainly evoked some odd emotions within her, but they had been quickly dispelled when they were interrupted by Saruin. Looking at Jack now, smiling as he taught Emerald some new piece of human knowledge, she couldn't help but feel something warm and unsettling in the pit of her stomach. Lonthal couldn't have been more surprised by Shahar's reaction if she turned into a Wolgan in front of his eyes. Looking at the expression flitting over her face, something finally fell into place.
Wait, you mean you and he haven't... You're not...
Shahar turned and seized Lonthal, pinning him by his throat against the tree.
If you value your life, you will not say another word on the subject.
Lonthal nodded emphatically, but Shahar couldn't help but notice the laughter hadn't left his eyes.
Whatever relationship the two of us has is none of your business. Understand?
Shahar stared at him a moment longer before realizing he couldn't answer as long as she cut off his air supply. She let him go, and the hunter slumped to the ground. He took a moment to catch his breath before looking up with a big grin on his face.
Just promise me that when you two make it official, you'll invite me to the bonding ceremony. I want to see what kind of party Jack's going to throw.
Shahar was undeniably the better combatant, but her mind was elsewhere at the moment. Even if Lonthal hadn't been expecting the half-hearted swipe that followed his statement, it had been so clearly telegraphed that he had plenty of time to get out of the way. Standing back up, he held up his hands in surrender and voiced his peace offering.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist a little fun at your expense. Usually it's me one step behind, and I couldn't help myself. I'll stop, though, I swear.
She glared at him, narrowed eyes measuring his response, before turning and walking away, still trying to work out her feelings on the matter. Still grinning to himself, Lonthal gathered up a handful of saplings and followed her to the cart.